Thank you for having me, Cece. It's always a pleasure to be on with you, and um, welcome everybody. I'm Dr. Donna DeSanto Ott from Pennsylvanians for Safe Technology, and in Pennsylvania here we have mandatory smart meters. I'm not sure how many of you know what they are. They're the new utility meters on the side of your house. So I learned from my doctor at the Cleveland Clinic that I wasn't supposed to have one, ended up being forced to get one, got really sick. So I've learned a lot. And I think, especially working with other people. And one of the things that's been on my mind, and I got a reminder today that maybe it's a good idea to talk about it, is that people can get very sick from this. And it's really important that if you know someone who is, that you try to learn about it and that you're as kind as you can be, because there are a lot of people who really suffer and they really need, any kind smile, any little bit of support, so you can really make a big difference. Some of these people have been disabled a long time. Some of them were disabled rather quickly, but it can happen. And I think the things we're going to talk about tonight are going to help us avoid this as much as possible. I think Cece has a great presentation, and you can use that to really optimize your chances of doing, as well as possible. So, you think of anything else, Cece?
Yeah, Donna, you have a really interesting story. You are a doctor, you are a mother of 5 children, and when you got so sick, you had to actually leave your home and abandon your family because you could not physiologically stay in the home that had the radiating smart meters, right?
Yes, that is correct. It's been 5 long years of it, and we learned a lot of lessons. And I think the stress on families, that's something that should have never happened. And I would hope and pray that that will not happen again. We try to work as hard as we can, and we're just always trying new things to be able to get people to be able to stay in their homes as long as possible. And I think, another thing we need to start thinking about is, for when there is a problem, like solutions kind of on a municipal, state, and national level. Like, what are we going to do? How can we support these people? Is there any grant money that we can use to build a little village for emergency housing, or some other solution that would offer hope to these people? And I think, most importantly, really following the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if people need an ADA accommodation and analog meters on their house, that costs almost nothing. And
Mhm.
especially, compared to, formal complaints and things like that we see here, to just let them go. In our neighboring states like New Jersey, it's $180 a year to just allow someone to live in their house, not have to live in a tent, not be so sick that they're, vomiting or having severe headaches or trouble walking, things like, chest pain, risks of arrhythmias, in their own houses. Like, just let them live in their house.
Yeah.
Really. So I think, just for all involved, kind of the golden rule, like, let's treat each other as we want to be treated,
Mhm.
whatever your capacity is, if you're a legislator or if you're an advocate, if you're a mom, dad, a sister, brother. It's just kind of,
Very good. All right. Well, I'm so sorry that you were taken down by the smart meters and that made you sensitive to all electromagnetic fields. Um, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do a screen share. And for those who are asking in the chat, if you can have copies of the slides and the video, the answer is absolutely yes. We will be sending those out probably tonight or tomorrow, and you will be able to share those with whomever you think would be interested in learning about this topic. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us tonight. My name is Cece Doucette, and I am the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And that MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved in this issue. So back when my kids were in school, we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need to have all this new technology to succeed in the world. And we live in a small town in Massachusetts. Our budgets had been cut to the bone year after year in our schools. So we didn't really have the funding to do what we were being told our kids would need. So, good doobie parents, we kind of raised our hands and started doing fundraising, and I was helping to lead our local Ashland Education Foundation. And after we started sharing the science and other information, we became the first in the United States back in 2014. So here, a full decade ago, to even have a little sign hanging in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices that say, turn off wireless devices when they're not being used and only turn on the Wi-Fi when you need it, and always place the device on a solid surface away from your body. So that was my initial foray into this area. And then when I realized this was just a sign hanging in our classrooms and they weren't actually following through and protecting the kids, I went to my state legislator. Tom Sanacandra was our state rep at the time. And then Senator Karen Spilka was my senator. And I met her for local office hours and I showed her the science. I showed her our little sign, and I had by then invested in a radio frequency radiation detection meter. And I measured her cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both devices went right off the charts into the red zone, full of radiation. And they're looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. Is there something from where you sit that we could at least give the public the right to know, like we ultimately did with tobacco and alcohol and drugs and, all of that? Adults will make their choices, but it's our moral obligation to at least protect our children. So Senator Spilka, who's now our Senate president, she put me with an attorney in her office, and Aaron Carty and I worked together on a very simple bill that would simply bring people to the table at the state level, look at the facts on this issue, and then decide what to do. And so we've helped with a number of bills in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire, and we've got some encouraging words to report a little bit further down in my slides. And then after somebody in Europe started studying this issue, Brett West was in the technology industry. It was his job to put wireless systems in major construction projects in the United Kingdom. And it crossed his desk that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that nobody's been trained to figure out what's going on. They put out a position statement to our school superintendents saying, please do not put wireless in your schools. Stick with hardwired technology. So Brett looked at that and he went, wow, and he started investigating and then realized, I can help people. I know how to hardwire. I know how to, have amazing technology without the radiation. So he just tried starting a side business to help people and quickly realized that you can't fix it because nobody knows the issue even exists. So education has to come first. So Dr. Deborah Davis, who's the Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change and the president of an incredible group called the Environmental Health Trust, she introduced me to Brett over in Europe and also introduced Dr. Mikko Ahonen of Finland. And Dr. Ahonen is one of the world's leading scientific researchers on this man-made energy that we call wireless. So we all hit it pretty hard and spent some time together and came up with a little course for a nonprofit called Wireless Education that we can literally train an entire school district in about a half an hour online with this little course. It teaches the facts, and then it gives you a little tip sheet and a certificate of compliance if you need to have compliance training for your work or your schools. So we've come a long way in the last 10 years. And during this whole episode, I was alone for the first 2 years. I didn't have anybody I could speak to. I was simply learning this on my own and trying to stick my fingers in the dike of the dam to stop the hemorrhaging. And I was so gratified when this Dr. Deborah Davis brought a panel of world-leading experts to our state house and was asking for right to know legislation. And so then I was able to start connecting with people from all over the state who knew about this issue. And boy, was that gratifying, because, you know, those first 2 years were pretty lonely. I knew what I was finding was true, but everybody by now has been convinced by the wireless industry that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go, and they're not getting any information to make balanced decisions. So I was very grateful at the State House to connect with a number of people across the state. And ultimately, we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So most of you will know that any of these blue underline comments in here, these are live links that you'll be able to go to and drill down and get to all the information to help you truly know this. We say, don't take our word on any of this. Go do your own research and get to know what this topic really means. And tonight we're going to teach you the science, the risks. We're going to teach you what's happening in the legal arena with public policy, and most importantly, things that you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones. So my website, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, has a lot of the science listed on our resources page. And we've got a states page that shows the inroads that we're making here and more information that you might find useful. So this next link I like to share if you're looking for something that would convey credibility in very short videos. This is a really nice one to share. Somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would please co-chair the technology panel for something that was called the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. These were professionals from all over the country, from all different sectors, from the medical community, doctors and hospitals, urban planners, architects, the green organizations, the certifying organizations, as well as government organizations. So we had this panel, and I gave the opening remarks, and then we heard from Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He flew in to say that, yes, industry can absolutely do better if given a nudge. We had Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, Dr. Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this, to teach us in less than 10 minutes what the mechanisms of harm are. And we'll talk about that tonight too. We had Theodora Scorado, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust. And we also had Peter Sullivan. And I had found Peter Sullivan's work through a lecture that he gave. And he used to be a fighter pilot, kind of like Top Gun. And so he was up, way up high, with the Earth's very high natural electromagnetic radiation or electromagnetic fields. And he was in a plane that had radar mounted on it inside of a cockpit that had all this instrumentation with all these other man-made energies coming off of them. So Peter wound up getting very sick. After he left the military, he went on to become an engineer in Silicon Valley. And the folks who invented cell phones were like some of his friends. So he was very well connected in this world. And he started dropping weight. His teeth started getting really brittle. And when each of his sons came up into the preschool years, both of them began presenting on the autism spectrum. And so Peter did his research and discovered all this science that we've got now today on the biological effects of man-made radiation. So what Peter did is what a lot of parents with children on the autism spectrum will do. They will start eliminating environmental exposures. So they'll get onto a clean organic diet so they're not putting toxic chemicals into the body. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to draw some of these toxins out of the organs in the brain. And then what he will tell families today is start with the digital detox. Have 12 hours at night where there's no radiation in your home. And it kind of blew my mind that he said, my two sons are now grown men and neither one of them are on the autism spectrum. And I didn't even know at that time that that was even a possibility. And he says there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline, it didn't come from dad's bloodline. It came from something in the environment. So Peter speaks quite often in the autism community. And so he came to our Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference to share some of the encouragements for how we can get to safe technology. So all of our talks at the National Institutes of Health were under 10 minutes. So they're really good, quick ways to establish credibility. And then one of the biggest gaps that we had when I fell down this rabbit hole about a decade ago is we could tell so many people were getting sick, but their doctors had never been trained to recognize this. And so we're so grateful. We've had 2 major medical conferences to date. The last one was in 2021, and we called it the EMF Medical Conference. So I'll talk you through a little bit of the alphabet soup here. EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These, for what we're talking about today, are the pulsations of microwave radiation, or it's often called radio frequency radiation. But these are man-made spikes of radiation that pulse at us all the time. And it's that spiked pulse that the science is showing is really, really detrimental to our health. And to give a frame of reference, the Earth pulses a beautiful healing electromagnetic field. It pulses this healthy energy at us 7.83 times per second. That's something called Schumann resonance. There was a scientist named Schumann who figured that out. So Schumann's resonance is just under 8 times per second. We get this beautiful healing energy from the Earth. Well, when we got so fancy with digital technology, we went way beyond that 8 times a second. Those are called hertz, 7.83 hertz. We then developed digital technology in the megahertz range, which means 1 million times per second. All of our wireless technology is pulsing us with spiked erratic pulses of microwave radiation. That's the megahertz range. In the gigahertz range, which a lot of our technology is using today, that's 1 billion times per second. We're getting jackhammered with these spikes of microwave radiation. So we are so very grateful that we now have training, professional training available online. The EMF Medical Conference 2021 went through July of 2023, and it had 24.5 continuing medical education credits available. The credit opportunity has now closed. Elizabeth Kelly, who's the executive director of this conference, she has arranged to have the entire conference, all of the lectures from doctors, scientists, building biologists. I was honored to be brought in to speak on state and local policy. All of it is now free and online to everybody in the world. You can go to the EMF Medical Conference 2021 and access all of this rich, rich content. The lectures range from maybe 18 minutes to a half an hour to an hour. There are Q&A sessions. There are expert panels included. So please know, for everything that we have broken, we have a solution and we can fix it with some personal courage and political will. So that's how I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue. So how did my schools become the first in the nation to even have, our little sign hanging in our classrooms? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody watching with us today, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now and go into settings. And I'm going to walk you through the legal fine print. For anybody who doesn't have an iPhone, if you have an Android or a Google phone or whatever, it's in there. You just have to search on the make and model of your phone and type in RF exposure for radio frequency. So our friends at the Environmental Health Trust also have a web page called See the Fine Print, where you can go and look up what some of these warnings have been over the years. Look at this one that used to be in the Apple iPads. They talk about seizures, blackouts, eye strains. I know of 2 children in neighboring towns who had their first seizures while on an iPad. So this is happening in real time, folks. Okay, so once you're in your settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. From general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory, hit that, and then about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. So settings, general, legal and regulatory, and then RF exposure. And when we read this legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're holding this radiating device, if you're tucking it in your bra or your shirt pocket or your suit pocket or the waistband of your yoga pants or in your back pocket, you are exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's guidelines. They're not even standards, they're just guidelines for public radiation exposure. And then when you read a little further down, you'll see to reduce your exposure, basically don't touch it. They say use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. So once we know that this, one device has multiple antennas in it, each one, the cellular and data antenna, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, the locator antenna, the hotspot antenna, and for anyone who didn't know any better and already upgraded to a 5G phone, those have even more antennas in them. Each one is constantly pulsing this microwave radiation to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. So our message today is certainly not no technology because, admittedly, we all use it and we all live by it to navigate through our world today. So the message is not no technology, but it's high time we be given the facts so we can choose safe technology access, and we'll teach you how to do that tonight. So what I want to do next is to stop my screen share and show you a couple of things. So you know how I said for everything we've broken, there's a solution. So in that legal fine print, it says to use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. If you were to choose a regular headset with a wire that goes right up to your brain, one of the properties of this man-made radiation is that it amplifies with metal. So as soon as you put something metal up to your head with radiation attached to it, it's just going to go, woo, party on. We're going right up there, right up to your brain. Same thing with those earbuds. Those are extremely harmful. And now we're getting reports that it's causing hearing loss and bacteria gets wedged in there. And they're bad. But this is something called a hollow tube headset. So it still would plug into your cell phone or your device. The transmission will travel up the wire and you've got volume control with audio and muting and, all of that. And then it's got these 2 little beads here. These 2 little ferrite beads will break the radiation and allow the signal, the audio signal, to come through and travel up through this hollow tube. Notice there's no metal on the tips of this, so you're not putting metal up to grab all the radiant, the ambient radiation to your brain. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset and just make sure they don't have any metal going up to your brain. I saw one that looked pretty cool. It had a couple of magnets right here, so you could just hang it around your neck when you're not using it. But then I went, we don't want to put metal right up to the brain when something's radiating in our environment. So that's a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And when we talk about solutions, it's not rocket science to fix. When I discovered what this whole wireless issue was, I was pleasantly surprised that down in my basement, we still had a box of Ethernet cables. All you have to do is plug stuff back in. And who knew, for $20 or $30, you can buy a little adapter. This one is for the iPhone. It's the Lightning to RJ45 Ethernet adapter. So you plug one end of it into your router, you plug the other end into your device, or into your adapter, and then just plug this into your device. And then you have to go into the settings and turn off all those antennas. Otherwise, you're still getting radiated. I trust that in the future, our engineers will be asked to create devices that do not radiate once you plug them into an Ethernet cable. So I had a really hard time getting my head around this issue because the radiation is invisible. But if the COVID-19 pandemic taught us anything, we've got to be vigilant with invisible exposures in our environment. So I learned that there are radio frequency detection meters, and I will show you the one that was recommended at that EMF medical conference. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. So the Safe and Sound Pro 2, when I turn it on, it will run through, it's all flashing lights here, and then it will settle down. In my home, knowing what I know, I've worked pretty hard to create a sanctuary for myself and my family. So you see that I'm in the green here. That says slight. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less, and the unit of measurement that they use is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, within 3 feet of air, how much man-made radiation is there? You want to be at 10 or less. Right now, I'm between a 3 and a 7. So I want to give you a demonstration. I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. And when I take it out of airplane mode, all those antennas come online. And now we're up into the flashing red, into the extreme level on this meter. And I'm not even doing anything. These are just the antennas that radiate when we're given this device. So, oh boy. Oh, hang on, I'm going back into airplane mode. And you see that it drops off. It starts to dissipate as the radiation drops off. So before we did that little demonstration, we were at 7 microwatts per square meter. We want to be at 10 or less. We just went to 2,830,000 microwatts, almost 3 million, and we want to be at 10, not 10,000, but 10 or less. So that is how potent this radiation is. So I'm going to go ahead and resume my screen share. And you should be able to see that right now. Okay, so, you know, my mind goes towards solutions, right? We've made this problem. I literally brought it into my kids' schools through all these campaigns I ran. So I thought, well, you know what? My town has a little grant fund to fund projects in the community. Let me apply for a grant to put an acoustimeter in the library and get one for the schools. So I'm thinking, you know, this is great. We have a way to fix this. So I put my application in with our select board. That's like our city council here. And it was so new to them. They said, ooh, we don't know. Come back next time. So 6 months go by and I submit my application again. And they're like, oh, gee, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. And so so I went to the Board of Health, to our health agent, and he had been around back in the 1990s when the wireless industry got into our legislators up in Washington, D.C., and they passed this Telecommunications Act of 1996 that basically said, we're coming, we're putting cell towers in your community, and if anybody has any environmental considerations, gosh, you're out of luck. Look, the law says that you can't sue us, and they actually got that put in the law. So my health agent in Ashland, Massachusetts was around back then, and he said, hey, they took us out to fancy hotels. They literally wined and dined us to get us all lathered up about having cell towers in our town. And he said, but, you know, I don't really know much about Wi-Fi. And what we know today is that there are some limitations in the law around where you can cite a cell tower and where you can tell the industry, no, you can't have that application approved. The industry will come in and tell our towns that your hands are tied. And what we've since learned is you might have one little finger tied, but there's a lot that you can put into your local zoning laws that protect you to a great extent from industry just steamrolling in and putting all this stuff up. So that was what I learned from my health agent. And then I resubmitted my application a third time. And by then I had had my bill with the legislature. And when I went and testified at our state house, you only get 3 minutes. And so I'm holding up the science, I'm holding up Ashlyn's little sign, I'm showing the radiation in the room. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking into the eyes of every member of the Joint Committee on Public Health, and I could tell they had no idea this issue even existed. I mean, I had no idea until my girlfriend Wendy tipped me off at book group one night. She is an electrical engineer and was reading the book Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And she was telling us that it looks like there's something not quite right with wireless tech. So I get it. Everybody comes into this in their own time. And, you know, we've all been conditioned by the industry by this point. As soon as you open your mouth and go, I think we have a problem with wireless, everybody's brain goes tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, right? That's just what the industry's done to us. So we are here today to present the facts. And so after I testified in front of our state house, I realized 3 minutes testimony is not going to cut it. So I literally spent hour upon hour upon hour going to our state house and educating every single legislator who had a hand on one of these bills. And at one point we had 20 bills in Massachusetts to address wireless radiation. And so I spent a lot of time at our state house, and I realized it takes time to educate people. So I doubled back in my town, and one by one, I asked for meetings with every member of our select board. And I taught them about this issue. And then I resubmitted my application, and this was still new enough to them. They could see there was something there, but I don't think they had actually done the deep dive, but they knew there was something there. So what they did is they gave me a $400 grant to get 1 meter to put on loan in the library under the condition that the library trustees would agree to take this into circulation. So I went to the next board meeting of the library trustees. I presented the facts, and I had gotten the idea to even put one on loan because when the energy industry was taking away our incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with energy efficient CFL light bulbs, one of their marketing campaigns was to put a kilowatt meter on loan in our libraries on the hope that we would take it home, measure how much the incandescent light bulbs use versus these energy saving light bulbs. And then we would, you know, do the math and see how much money we'd save every year. So from a marketing strategy, that was brilliant. It turns out that those CFL light bulbs and many of the LED light bulbs, they've got an on-off flicker that is really hard on many of us biologically. So they're economically safe, but they're not biologically safe. So that's how I got the idea to put a meter on loan. And we had 5 members of our library trustee board. And one gentleman sat there with his arms folded, and you could just tell he had hogwash written all over his face. And another one was like, well, I want to get that meter. I want to take it home and I want to see what's going on in my house. And a third woman said, you know, regardless of how we feel personally about this, we are a conduit of information in our community. So let's take a vote. So Ashland Public Library here in Massachusetts voted 4-1, and they put this acoustimeter on loan in the public library back in 2016. And that became a wonderful pilot program. Now we're getting word that people all over the country are going to their libraries and saying, hey, we'd like to have a radio frequency detection meter on loan in our library too. And it's actually not a hard conversation to have today, because as technology has come in, fewer people are actually reading hardbound books. A lot of them are using e-readers and so forth. And so our libraries are reinventing themselves to continue to be a community center. So most libraries today will have a library of things. And my daughter, for example, is waiting to borrow the power washer from her library. So they have all sorts of games and puzzles and equipment and tools. And so it's not really hard to go in and ask, and we can provide you with information on how we loan this out in our community. At the first medical conference in 2019, I flew all the way out to California for that one to meet a doctor who turned out to be right from here in Newton, Massachusetts. And she and I went after a state level grant, and we got an acoustimeter put in her library. And then in more recent years, out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Verizon put a cell tower up illegally on top of this neighborhood. And the day that that thing got turned on was 6 big antennas. It's actually licensed for 48. But when the first 6 went up and got turned on, people started getting sick. Children were vomiting in their beds. Pets were vomiting. Headaches, nosebleeds, nausea, dizziness, anxiety, depression. Cancers that had been in remission came back, and at least one has already died from that. Pittsfield has been fighting this Verizon cell tower for 3 years, and we'll tell you more about the legal battle that's going on now. But their library funded one of the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meters right out of their budget. So it's definitely worth opening the conversation with your library. And if your budget is cut to the bone, you can reach out to the Environmental Health Trust, and they have a small grant fund that if the library contacts them, they can help them to get one of these meters put on loan. So that's something that we can all do in addition to becoming educated. We can ensure that our communities have the tools necessary to measure this invisible exposure. Okay, so what we've discovered is over the years, what used to be like 50 independent media channels, media outlets, have been bought up and bought up and bought up and bought up. And now we're left with the same 4 to 6 major conglomerations that own most of mainstream media. And they also own a lot of these environmental polluter industries. So what we get through mainstream media has embargoed or put a stop to reporting on wireless radiation risks. So one of the last bastions of independent reporting that's left in our communities is our local cable station. And they love when citizens come and say, hey, would you help me do a program for the community? So I was very fortunate that WACA TV here in Ashland sent resources to my house, and we created this 23-minute public service announcement where we do a walkthrough of a typical home and show where all these exposures are today. And importantly, suggestions for what you might do about that if you don't want to continue to radiate yourselves. And then I was brought in as a guest on a couple of episodes at WCCA TV on a soapbox program. And the director of that cable station last year reached out and said, hey, Cece, I think you should just have your own program for teaching people about wireless. And I thought, well, that's awfully generous. So now we have this series called Tech Safe, and every couple of weeks we come out with a new episode. So we've got, I think, maybe 26 or 27 episodes under our belt. They're all 28 minutes, so not long to watch, but a really nice place to go to hear directly from people who have been harmed. Donna DeSanto Ott, Dr. Ott, and I just recorded one last month. So there's a 28-minute episode of her fuller story there. So please don't be shy about going to your own cable stations and asking them to help do programming. I would be honored to be interviewed in your cable station. We can do it by Zoom, or if you're local, I can come out there. But anything we can do to help get word out. Okay. So let's look next at what the science is telling us. We're going to look first at the long-term effects, and then we're going to look at the short-term effects. So for years, the industry would spin it that there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature that would account for biological effects, except for heating. So right now, our government guidelines and all over the world, they say you have to have heat from a device before there can be any harm. So that's what we call the thermal effect. That's what the industry did for years. They said, oh, if there's no heating, there's no harm. Well, our own government, through the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is arguably the gold standard in the world for toxics research, they were told by the Food and Drug Administration 20 years back to investigate whether cell phones could be hazardous, because 20 years ago, cell phones were the new tech of the day. They went in expecting to prove that cell phones are fine. Instead, after they did their research on rodents, at the end of the day, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, and they documented clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other findings. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. And so when one of these good studies comes out, the industry will spin it up and say, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more studies. Well, right on the heels of our big study here in the US on cell phones, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another multi-million-dollar study on cell tower base stations. So now we've got the phones and we've got the base stations all saying the same thing: cancers, DNA damage, and more. So we don't need more science. We can always use more in science to, to refine what we know, but we know enough today that we need to start taking serious action. So child and adult cancers, DNA damage. DNA, we know, is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a child to a plant to a pollinator to any biome that has a living cell in it, and it's damaging the DNA. It was the infertility studies that got me on my feet. I had started reading the sperm studies, and I saw that they've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed that DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable or programmed cell death or apoptosis in just 4 hours of exposure to a laptop's radiating antennas. And I went, oh man. We had just sent our oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook, which of course she's using right on top of her reproductive organs. And our youngest had just gone into high school back then. And we thought we'd give her a leg up. And so for Christmas, we gave her a laptop. And where was she using it? But right on top of her ovaries as well. And now we have additional studies on infertility with women. Kaiser Permanente came out with a really good study that shows that women who are using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates. So we can't keep doing this to ourselves and expect to have what used to be normal biology. And then there's the neurotoxicity. So folks will know that even before the pandemic, we were already at epidemic levels of anxiety, depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation among children and adults like we've never seen before. And now the science has accumulated. The AD, attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity disorder, Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School. And he has done some of these rodent studies. And when he exposed the rodents to man-made radio frequency from a cell phone for a certain number of hours a day, when the pups were born, they would be like bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world, no control, no focus, much like a child with ADD or ADHD. Dr. Martha Herbert, Harvard pediatric neurologist, founded the autism lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge connections between what we know happens with microwave radiation exposure and what was happening to the families in her care. And then Dr. Martin Pall went and culled all this science on Alzheimer's, and he came out with a really good paper on the neurotoxicity from all of this. And he started documenting that where Alzheimer's used to start hitting in our 70s or 80s or 90s, we are now seeing it in our 60s, our 50s, our 40s, our 30s, and even in some cases in our 20s. So we cannot continue to pollute the environment of the brain and then be surprised at all of this neurotoxicity that's going on. So because the industry has such a lock on mainstream media, we're very grateful when better known groups start getting funding to address the wireless radiation issue. One of these groups is the Environmental Working Group. And I first knew of their good work around pesticides and the toxic chemicals that are going in to grow our foods. So they come out with their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 lists every year to say which produce you should probably buy organically if you can get it, and which is not quite so bad if you buy it conventionally grown. So I knew about the Environmental Working Group, and now they have gotten funding and they have a PhD on staff now who's working on the wireless issue, and they have issued some really nice mainstream fact sheets. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. And this one over here is about the radio frequency impacts on the central nervous system. So feel free to use these resources and share them. And we just have to accept that children are not little adults. They are still under construction. Their central nervous system, their immune system, their skulls, everything is still being developed. And what the science shows is, for example, Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues did the modeling on what happens when we put a cell phone up to our head. These are the heads turned sideways in the modeling, and the yellow dot is the ear. So when you put, as an adult, a cell phone up to your head, that radiation is penetrating about a third of your brain. On a 10-year-old child, it's going about 3/4 of the way into the brain. And on a 5-year-old child, that microwave radiation is pulsating almost the entire brain. So we have got to do our best to protect our collective children. So now let's look at the short-term effects. One thing that's really nice to know is that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized what they term electromagnetic sensitivities, and they've got guidelines out there for accommodations that you can offer at work if somebody has become electrically sensitive. But they haven't put any teeth into it, and we really need them to step up and really start protecting the public from this radiation. And there are some really important inroads being made there today. So one of the biggest things that has changed is that people don't sleep right anymore. And it used to be when we were kids and teenagers, sleeping is what we did best. And now we have kids who don't sleep anymore. And now we know another mechanism of harm. So we are beings of light. We operate off of the light-dark cycle with our circadian rhythm. In the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland releases melatonin, and melatonin goes in and helps to regulate our sleep and also to do cell repair and cleanup and escort the toxins of the day out through the bloodstream. Well, our poor brains cannot differentiate between natural daylight and this man-made light energy form of microwave radiation. So if we leave this stuff pulsing all night long, for many people, their brains are going, hey, when's it going to get dark so I can release the melatonin? And if we don't turn that stuff off, we start getting into a whole downstream effect of illness when we don't get proper sleep. So the good news is that after one of these training sessions, people will come back and say, I didn't want to know this. I didn't want to believe it. I live on my devices, but oh my gosh, some of these symptoms you described really resonated with me. And so I just took a chance and I just did what you said. I created a sleep sanctuary. And they start sleeping through the night for the first time in their lives or in years. So insomnia is a big one. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, fatigue, chronic fatigue. So now we know another mechanism of harm. It's something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I liken it to those candies, Rolos, you know, that stack of caramel chocolates. Well, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our systems and organs. That oxygen is really critical to helping us to live a proper life. What we see when we're exposed to microwave radiation is these free-floating red blood cells start to get a little deformed and they start looking like bottle caps, and then they start magnetizing together or clumping together, and then this chain of deformed red blood cells can't get to where it needs to go to bring the oxygen. And so doctors will talk about oxidative stress being the underlying condition for most chronic illnesses. So lots of inroads we can take to remove this exposure and perhaps regain a lot of our health. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. So who knew? We've got like little antennas in the surface of our skin. Some people, when they start tuning into this issue, will say, yeah, man, I get this hot ear when I put the cell phone up here. or I'm getting these weird rashes. Or the gentleman who designed our logo for Massachusetts for Safe Technology, he lives in the town next door, and his leg was going jiggity. And his doctors couldn't figure it out. Specialists couldn't figure it out. So Chuck started doing his own research and discovered the biological effects of radio frequency radiation and what that can do to your nerves. And guess where Chuck used to keep his cell phone? Right in that pocket where his leg was going jiggity. So he started hardwiring everything in his house. He no longer kept that in his pocket, and his symptoms resolved. Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow. So our heart, our brain, our lungs, these are all electrical organs. Our cells whisper to each other all the time and communicate information. And when we overpower this internal communication system with all these man-made frequencies, it can do a number. Somebody's heartbeat might go too fast or too slow based on their own individual proclivity. Cognitive impairment where we just can't think right anymore. Anger, behavior issues, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Another mechanism of harm is that we have something called the blood-brain barrier. It's a membrane that covers our brain as a protective measure. So when the bloodstream is escorting toxins out of the body, they don't go into the brain. Sadly, what Dr. Palpatcher and other scientists discovered is that when we bombard ourselves with microwave radiation, it opens up or permeates that blood-brain barrier. So now we've got holes in the blood-brain barrier. And when the blood's going by, it can take a turn and get into this sensitive organ in there. And it's no wonder we see anxiety, depression, PANS, PANDAS, autism, ADD, ADHD, all these neurological issues happening. And one of the saddest takeaways from that EMF medical conference is that the doctors were telling us, if we don't get ahead of this, we are biologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain where we would do reasoned decision making. So if we don't get ahead of this, we can expect to see many more of these anger outbursts in society like we've been seeing with these mass shootings. When Massachusetts children went back to school after the pandemic, during the pandemic, we had issued every child a wireless device, a tablet, to access their education with not one shred of safety training. We didn't teach them to hardwire and turn off those antennas. So now these kids have, by and large, had unfettered access to this technology because mom and dad are busy trying to work from home, talk about stress, right? But we had news reports when the kids went back to school out of 3 different school districts in Boston alone, where the kids had taken their Chromebook and were beating on their classmates with it, the anger, they couldn't control their emotions. And I mentioned this to a woman I met at my gym in my yoga class, and she says, oh my gosh, I am a counselor at the local high school in Framingham, and we have one of our colleagues out on disability because one of the students beat her up with his tablet. So this is happening already, folks. It's not if or when, it's now. And we need to get ahead of it. And the science is very strong that this is what's happening. And unfortunately, it's not just you and I, it's every biological creature on the planet. The Environmental Health Trust has recently launched a wonderful new website called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment, where you can go look at all the science on this. And one of the things that we know, in addition to the neonicotinoids that are taken down pollinator species, we have a very deep body of evidence that shows that these pulsations of microwaves are also taking down species of pollinators and other creatures in our environment. And the birds, when they started testing 5G in the Hague in the Netherlands, literally hundreds of birds dropped from the sky, either dead or stupefied by the microwave radiation. And we've seen reports of that on cruise ships where they put these powerful antennas up on the top deck. And then for anybody concerned about climate change, we should know that this technology is a huge energy hog. As far back as 2012, a Greenpeace analyst ran the numbers and said that if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was a decade ago. And look how much more we have been talked into adopting in our world today. So Katie Singer has done some excellent work to outline what goes into putting these devices together, the dozens of minerals that go into each device. If we really understood the human toll and atrocities that are happening down in the Congo and elsewhere to get us everything to create one of these devices, we would never just toss it aside and get the latest and greatest that they're pushing at us. We would use everything to its full useful life and then recycle at the end of that. All these data warehouses and networks and our personal devices are consuming energy all the time. Every time we stream, that consumes a huge amount. So don't stream live. Download it on your device and then go into airplane mode and watch it on your device that way. Every time you send and receive, we're using energy. Every time we charge and recharge all of our devices, we're consuming energy. And in the background, all these apps we've been talked into for the cool factor, they're back there using energy to do continuous updates. So let's start making choices around how we want to access technology. Hardwire everything you can and turn off the antennas. And not only do you get a safer connection, but it's screaming fast. It's far more reliable. Your data is not flying through the air for any hacker to grab with a $100 app out at the curb. So our data and privacy are so much better protected when we use hardwired connections. So there's a lot that we can do. But one of the biggest questions I had when I fell down this here rabbit hole was, if this is as bad as little me can find just by reading the science, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this incredible free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And notice the graphic they chose for the cover. It's a revolving door. And that's what most of our federal agencies today have become. There are still some good people up in our federal agencies, but by and large, most of them have been captured by industry, where we once had qualified scientists investigating the low-level, non-thermal microwave radiation impacts. All that got defunded when that Telecom Act was passed in 1996. And they've recently defunded the further studies from the National Toxicology Program. So there's no cavalry coming from up above. We can't sit here and wait for the feds to fix this, because Fed equals industry today. So then more recently, ProPublica came out with an article about this too. And remember that National Toxicology $30 million study, it was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration 2 decades ago. The gentleman who's in charge of that today is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when that NTP study was done and they concluded clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage, Dr. Shuren went over to the FCC and said, we don't really believe that, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. And one might ask, what would possess Dr. Shuren to do that? So you do a little more research and you discover that he is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry to the tune of billions of dollars. So serious conflicts of interest. He should have been nowhere near that study. And then, sadly, it goes all the way up to the top at the World Health Organization. Unless you were informed, you wouldn't know that there are 2 groups at the WHO that are addressing these man-made frequencies. One of them was comprised of highly qualified scientists whose life's work is studying microwave radiation. The other is an industry-backed, self-appointed group that manages to suppress the information coming forward at the World Health Organization too. So when the U.S. National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute both found clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage among the many other findings out there, the WHO was forced to reopen their investigation, but it looks like they've stacked the panel with industry people again. So again, folks, there's no cavalry coming. We have got to address this in our homes, in our schools, and in our own communities, and then force that up from the grassroots level. So that's all the bad news. Let's show you the solutions now. So on the back of your router, or the bottom of your router, somewhere on there, you can flip it around and find Ethernet ports. Just get a big long Ethernet cable. If you have to buy one, look for one that says shielded. That means it has a foil liner around the wires in the plastic encasement. That foil liner prevents the electric and magnetic fields, another form of man-made energy, from pulsating out into your living space from, right now our walls have all our electrical wires that can pulse this man-made energy too. And we don't want those electromagnetic fields exposing us any more than we can. So if you can, pay the extra couple bucks and get a shielded Ethernet cable. And then most of us have more than one device that we use today in our houses. So you can get something like an extension cord for electronics. It's called an Ethernet switch, and they're little. This is what the little 5-port one looks like. So from your router, you would plug one Ethernet cable into one port. And then for every device you have, just get another separate Ethernet cable and plug those in. And now each one of these connections has a direct connection to the internet. So you're not competing for bandwidth anymore like you do with crummy wireless technology. So you get little Ethernet cables, you buy these little adapters, and again, most of it's not going to break the bank. And then you plug it in. So that's how you hardwire. You just connect with wires. The second step is you then go into everything that has an antenna and find those antennas and turn them all off in your settings. And the third step is to measure, because right now with the Internet of Things, the industry is pushing at us that they are predicting we will all have 200 devices in our home connected to the Internet of Things. 200 radiating devices. And our phones, for example, and our printers, they have multiple antennas in, but you can't always tell that you've gotten them turned off unless you measure. So we really encourage that people get a meter, get one for your library, get one for yourself, go in with friends and neighbors, pitch in, get one, however you need to do it. But it's critically important that you learn to measure. And this was meant to be mobile technology. It was never meant to be inside of our buildings, but there was a revenue stream to be had. So they started putting all these boosters and routers and all this stuff. Well, turn off the antennas. You can forward in your settings your cell phone to a landline. And I know a lot of people got talked out of keeping their landlines, but if you are concerned about the safety factor, you can simply get your landline back for about 20 bucks a month. And then just forward your cell phone calls when you're not on the go. Okay, so that's the stuff that we have control over. There are a few emissions that you may or may not have control over, and one of them is these utility smart meters. So when I was a little kid, we had a big family. We were 10 kids, and we played outside a lot. We did a lot of hide and seek, so I'd be back there hiding in the bushes, waiting to be found, and with 10 kids, it could be a while. So I'd just sit there watching the little dials going around on these meters that were mounted on our home for gas, water, electric. Today we have solar, propane, whatever. If it has a Federal Communications ID number, an FCC ID number on it, that's your tip-off that it has a radiating antenna inside of it. So they've taken our analog meters away, or they're in the process of taking all of our strictly mechanical analog meters that would last for 40 or 50 years. They've told our towns, hey, we can save you some money. If you put this smart meter on or this digital meter on your home, you won't have to pay a staff member to walk the neighborhoods to get the readings. The first thing they did, was a drive-by. So they would have a Department of Public Works employee in a truck. And as they approach the neighborhood, they might turn on all the meters, remotely, turn them all on, and then drive through the neighborhood, scan with their scanner toward your house and pick up the reading. And that's how they would do your billing. And then when they left the neighborhood, they would turn that off. So that wasn't so bad. And then they started putting these meters on that transmit 24/7. And the industry will spin it that, oh, it's just a few seconds a day. Well, when I was getting ready to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I created a little 3-minute video where I sat on the floor in my dining room, now next to the wall, where we have 2 electric meters mounted outside, one for our regular electric and one for our solar system. So I'm in my house and I'm sitting there with my meter and I'm counting how many spikes of radiation were coming through the walls of my home. 17,000 times a day. And if you have like this illustration here shows, if you have somebody on the other side of the wall, they can get very sick very fast. And we have so many reports from around the world that that's exactly what happens. And that's what we were cautioned about at the EMF medical conference, is the doctors were telling us that when these smart meters go in, or when we have close range cell towers or 5G small cells, they see a significant uptick in people coming in with microwave sickness symptoms. So these things are not smart at all. That's a marketing term to make us be lulled into thinking this is a great thing. So they pulse this radiation continuously. And remember, we talked about how this radiation likes metal. It amplifies around metal. Well, the signals can hop onto the wires and pipes of your home and travel all around the house, creating your home into one big giant antenna if they're not installed properly. And then there are so many reports of fires and explosions and improper grounding and power surges. And oh, there's so many bad things happening with these smart meters. And then for those who are concerned about your privacy issues, this is a new revenue stream for the industry because they are able to grab all your data. They can tell what appliances you're using, how much energy you're using. And the way it works on these smart grids is, say, this is your house. Your data will be carried up to the next house. Then that data will be picked up and it'll all be sent on. So the further down the pipeline you go, the more radiation is coming in through with all these new data packets here. And then it's meant to go off to like a WiMAX thing that's mounted on a pole somewhere in the neighborhood. And if your house happens to be the last one, I mean, you're getting a significant amount of radiation coming through. And then theoretically, they send this off to the utility company to do your billing. But we see now evidence that they're taking your data and they're selling it off to third-party vendors who can then use that information to try and sell you products. Some believe there are other nefarious things happening with our governments and militaries. And all of this is being done wirelessly. So anybody with that $100 app out at the curb can see the patterns of your usage and know you leave your house at 8 in the morning, you don't come back till 6 at night. They can back up their truck and take your toys while you're off at work. So a lot of reasons why these smart meters are a bad idea. And it's a big environmental justice issue. These toxic companies roll into our communities. They go to communities first where people are low income, racially diverse, working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head and food on the table. They don't have time to tune into what's going on in their communities. And they bring a lot of money into the community and they will start sponsoring this program or that program to look like a good corporate citizen. And then they'll say, hey, look how successful this pilot program was, for example, in Worcester, Massachusetts. We're going to roll this out all across the state now. And hey, New York, hey, Connecticut, hey, Rhode Island, you're behind the times, man. Get with it. Look what Massachusetts is doing. So these are the tactics they use to roll this toxic technology out into our communities. And for people who work in the industry, a lot of them don't know this, and it comes as quite a shock, and people will get defensive. So we like to share a couple of different TED Talks that were done. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer, and he's married to a medical doctor. And they both got really sick really suddenly, and nothing in her training as a doctor could help them figure it out. And once they got to the bottom of it, it was because a bank of smart meters went in on their condo and they just got radiated. So he does a really good TED Talk here from somebody in the industry. It's very powerful. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight is actually a radiologist. She's a veterinarian radiologist, so she works with radiation for a living. And, you know, she knows that we have to shield the animals and everybody when we're taking x-rays. And she had no idea about the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level, man-made microwave radiation until a smart meter went in on her home. And she still didn't know what was going on, but she started getting all the symptoms. And she became so neurotoxic that she was out in traffic one day with her daughter in the car, and she couldn't remember if that green light meant stop or go. And thank goodness she did the 50-50 and chose go. And they made it home safely. But then something malfunctioned on her home and they had to remove the smart meter for a little while, and all her symptoms resolved. And she didn't really make the connection until they put the smart meter back on her home and all those symptoms came back. So she has a really good TED Talk there from a medical doctor who works with radiation. So very credible resources for us to learn from. Okay, so we have our own devices. We talked about what we can do to help reduce our exposures there. We talked about the smart meters. Now let's look at the cell towers. They began in industrial parks 300 feet up in the air, far away from where anybody lived or went to school or went for medical care or went to their houses of worship or the recreation fields. They were far away because these big cell antennas, they travel for miles with their signal. So that's where we started. And then they started encroaching and getting closer and closer. And then they started saying, hey, you know, we're selling so much of this product. So many people are using cell phones and wireless and all of this. We need more cell antennas to handle the capacity. So then they started putting them literally in people's neighborhoods, on buildings, on the sides of the buildings, on rooftops, behind facades sometimes. If they can paint it the same color of the building, they'll give the building owner some money to lease that space. So it sounds like a good deal, but you're radiating the heck out of everybody near those towers. So again, the industry always spins it, oh, you know, being under a cell tower is the safest place you can be because the radiation goes out like this. Well, that's not true. That radiation comes down in a big giant lobe and everybody around it is getting zapped. So it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science. And I mentioned earlier that I'm a tech writer. So I started getting in way over my head on this issue. And then I couldn't remember where I found resources that I wanted to revisit or share. And so I created a very simple research repository of my own called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So I built a website and there's no bells and whistles. It's just straight bulleted facts with things bolded so you can quickly skim and grab what you need. But what the science is telling us is in the epidemiological studies, and that was a new term I had to learn. That means not what's happening in the lab, not what's happening inside like an animal or a rodent, but what's actually happening out in society. That's what the epidemiological studies show. And there is a curve where we see higher death rates and neurotoxicity and insomnia and all these other symptoms within 500 meters of a cell tower. And in the US, we would say that's 1,640 feet. That's where that death and neurotoxicity curve starts to come down. It doesn't actually level out to regular population statistics until about double that. So 500 meters is already something of a compromise. It should really be 1,000 meters or more. And for vulnerable populations of children, pregnant women and fetuses, the elderly, and anybody with an existing health condition, it should be at least a half a mile away. But you're hard pressed to find that much distance from a cell tower today. So you're always welcome to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. If you look on our resources page, you will find a bulleted list of all of these pages in my personal research repository. And with great thanks to the many scientists and doctors whose work I reference, and we just stand on the shoulders of giants as we try to educate. So here's a tool that you might want to use. It's a website called antennasearch.com. You can put in any address, and it will give you a 3-mile return of all the macro cell towers, the big cell antennas and the towers within 3 miles. In my neighborhood, I get a couple hundred that are listed. When I put in the address of the State House in Massachusetts, right in downtown Boston, 1,520 towers with more than 4,500 of these massive antennas that pulse for miles. So the electropollution in our cities has just gotten out of control. This is what one Boston neighborhood looks like with all these cell towers there. And we wonder why people don't feel good these days. Now, let's add on 5G small cells. So 5G just means 5th generation technology. It came after 4G and 3G and 2G. 1G, we started with a cell phone. Then we added some texting. And then with 3G, we added some internet connectivity. And then with 4G, we basically had a computer in our hands. And now with 5G, 5th generation technology, they're spinning it up that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways, all this cool stuff. But take a look at who's buying up the entertainment industry as they push all this streaming at us. It's the same companies that own the telecom companies. So it's another revenue stream. And 5G today does not fly unto itself. They still have to have the backbone of 3G and 4G waves in order for 5G to work. So right now, our 3G and 4G signals are long, and they can therefore penetrate through walls and ceilings and floors and get in from a cell tower to reach your devices indoors or while you're out walking around. They still need that for 5G, and all that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves that they are spinning up, that they're going to give us faster speeds and all this new capability. But the kicker is that they get disrupted. There's so little they get disrupted by things in the path, like buildings, cars, people, rain, snow, leaves on trees. So it's really crummy technology that they are trying to squeeze their next nickel out of. So their goal, in order for 5G to fly, these little millimeter waves can't go very far. So they want to put cell towers every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods, in our front yards, in our backyards, right at the curb at bedroom height, that will pulse microwave radiation 24/7 at us. That is what 5G is. And we've gotten reports that they literally come in under the cover of darkness and start lopping off the trees so that the signals can get through to your 5G devices on the street or indoors. So, and this is at a time when our cities are starting to reinvest in putting more trees in, to build a tree canopy to cool our cities because we're in so much trouble with climate change. So 5G is a really raw deal. Senator Richard Blumenthal was at a congressional hearing with the Commerce Committee up in Washington, D.C., and he said to 2 industry lobbyists, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in ensuring that 5G is safe before it comes to market? And these 2 industry guys kind of do the hemming and the hawing, and then they say, well, we don't actually know of any independent science that we funded. So Senator Blumenthal said, so basically we're flying blind here as far as health and safety are concerned. And then the kicker is Computer World and others are reporting that 5G is a bad joke. We're not even getting the faster speeds any faster than we already had with toxic 4G signals. And then, Verizon went off and announced, well, we're going to provide 100 million customers with 5G at the beginning of 2022. So yeah, and I include this last link here because we need to understand that biologically, our cells only have so much energy, and it's pretty well calibrated to get us through a normal day here on this planet. When we have all this man-made exposure happening around us, that takes energy for our cells to try and keep up with the repair. And so Dr. Beverly Rubik and Dr. Rob Brown did a study, and they went and they looked at the data on COVID-19, and they discovered statistically significant higher rates of death and COVID cases in areas that were highly in electropollution, including 5G. And they're not saying that 5G caused the pandemic. What they are saying is that our cells can only keep up with so much. So when you have all this electropollution pulsing at us all the time, and then you add on a virus on top of that, our bodies quite often don't have what it takes to recover through our immune system. So that's a really important paper that usually when a paper is submitted for publication, there's something called a peer review, where 2 or 3 other experts in the field will look at the study and make sure it was done with scientific integrity. And then it gets published. Well, they had 15 or 16 peer-reviewed experts on this study because they knew it was going to get a lot of flack. So this study was actually published after the peer review. Okay, so Dr. Magda Havas was the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference. She is a professor emeritus, which means she retired with distinction from Trent University up in Canada. She is a scientist on the wireless radiation issue, and she taught EMFs up at Trent for 25 years. And she knows that our governments, by and large, have dropped the ball on measuring all this cumulative exposure. So Dr. Havas has created what she calls the Global EMF Monitoring Project, and she nicknamed it her brag project. Like, can you brag about your town? How high are your exposures? So the BRAG stands for black, red, amber, green. Green is 1,000 microwatts per square meter or less outdoors. So if you're just passing through and it's only at 1,000, you're not standing under a radiating transmitter all day, but just passing through. If it's under 1,000 and you have a sanctuary at home where your body can do cell repair and regeneration, we might be kind of okay. Amber gets from 1,000 to 10,000 microwatts. In the red zone, we're up to 100,000. And in the blackout zone, we're at 100,000 or more. So those limits on the green were set by scientists at a convention that was held in Salzburg some years ago. And you can access the global EMF.net project. And Dr. Havas is asking us as citizens to be citizen scientists. And anybody who purchases this Safe and Sound Pro 2, because you have to have the same instrument to do a study, you can volunteer to go out into your community and take readings according to her little clipboard protocols, and it will help science. So anybody who is looking to purchase a meter, and you might be interested in the Safe and Sound Pro 2, if you contact Dr. Havas's team and let them know you want to be a citizen scientist, our friend Rob Metzinger, who owns the company that makes this at Safe Living Technologies, he is offering a discount to anybody who wants to support the science project. So reach out to globalemf.net and ask for the code, and they'll help you sign up to be a citizen scientist. For me, when I did it, I think it was about a 20 to 20% discount, which saved me almost $100 off of a $400 meter. So that can be useful. So what do our communities look like now, number-wise? Again, we want to be 1,000 or less. One of our colleagues in New Hampshire measured their fire department, looking pretty good at green. Keene, New Hampshire at the time was getting into the amber, and now they have since put in these 5G small cells right at the curb outside people's homes. So we suspect they're in the red or the black now. Nashua was already in the red. Concord, New Hampshire. This was taken during the pandemic where there were very few pedestrians, almost no street traffic with the cars, and just the ambient radiation was already in the red. And then Stratham, New Hampshire, they put a massive cell tower right on the main drag, and they're in the blackout zone there. And then in the north end of Boston, for anybody who has visited our town, you'll know that that's where the amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries are. It's a huge tourist area. But look above the shops. This is where people came to live during World War I. These were tenement housing units up here, and now they're apartments and condos. This looks to be a pretty street lamp, but it's actually a small cell, fancy looking antenna right at street level. And when we measured on this corner, we were over 500,000, and we want to be at 1,000 or less. So this is what our towns have turned into as the industry has pushed all this in. So that's all the bad news. I'm going to leave you guys with a lot of research, a lot of resources to help us see our way clear to solutions. So let's look at it through the eyes of Dr. Martin Luther King. He identified that when we make important changes finally in our society, it comes through 3 channels. The public learns and gets motivated to do something about it, and that's what we're hoping to inspire you with today. The courts eventually rule and hold the guilty accountable. And then in the end, public policy catches up to, in this case, the science. So I'll go through some of the highlights in each one of these areas. And then, as I said, we will send you my slides and we will send you the recording of this so that you can go back and re-listen. We welcome you to come back anytime to our live presentation so you can ask questions at the end. We'll be doing a Q&A tonight. But just know all these resources are here for you. And if we can help you connect the dots quickly to get you to safe technology, that's our goal. A lot of lawsuits are happening all over the country and all over the world, but we don't hear about it in mainstream media. So that $30 million study that the FDA commissioned, that the now guy in charge told the FCC, don't worry about it. Once the FCC took that advice and entered their formal viewpoint into something called the Federal Register, they said, we can stick with our 1996 public radiation exposure limits. Well, meanwhile, there had been a docket open at the FCC where science had been poured in, medical reports had been poured in, testimonies from sick people or survivors of loved ones who had already passed away. So there was this huge public record that had been built, and the FCC closed that record and said, we're not going to change anything. Once they entered that determination into the Federal Register, then the lawsuits began. The Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others around the country sued the FCC for ignoring all this evidence of harm. So what happened was it all got rolled in under one lawsuit, the Environmental Health Trust versus the Federal Communications Commission. And they spent thousands of dollars and hours culling all that information from the public record, and they put it into 27 big fat binders, 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. And they presented it to the 3 judges in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And the judges are going through all this evidence, and they look at the attorneys for the FCC and said, so how did you determine you can stay with those 1996 guidelines? And the FCC did one of these and said, oh, the FDA said it was okay. So of course the judges asked, well, where's the FDA's homework? And there is none, because none of our federal agencies have done the review of the scientific body of literature. So there's a huge regulatory gap at our federal level right now. So what the courts did is, apparently, the courts don't like to tell our agencies what they have to do, so they give it back to them to give them another chance to get it right. So they remanded this back to the FCC to account for vulnerabilities to children, to the elderly, to people with electromagnetic sensitivity, to address infertility, to address all these environmental impacts. And that was remanded back to the FCC on Friday, the 13th of August of 2021. And it's been over 2 years, and the FCC has done nothing to respond to that court order. And the judges didn't put a time limit to it. So this is the game that the FCC and the industry play. They stretch everything out as long as they can, which is why it's vital, literally, to you and I in our communities to learn this and then start putting protections in place at the local level. So there are lawsuits happening all over the country. I mentioned that Verizon put up a cell tower illegally on top of this neighborhood in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, out in the Berkshires, a really beautiful area that people choose to move to because it's so bucolic and it's just lovely. And now 17 children and adults got so sick from that cell tower that they have had to abandon their homes. They've been fighting their town on this for 3 years. Halfway through it, their mayor and city council finally said to their board of health, okay, go ahead and investigate this. They talked to world-leading scientists. They talked to the doctors who have given diagnoses of electromagnetic illnesses. They've talked to engineers who truly understand what this is. And they also spoke to the industry representative, this Dr. Eric Swanson from Pittsburgh. And they looked into his background, and he was in there saying, oh, this is fine. This is man-made. It's great. It's no harm, no heat, no harm. And they looked into his background. He has never published a single study on this topic. He is a physics professor down there, and he specializes in quarks and other properties of physics. He has no expertise, but he's a hired gun by the industry. And so the Pittsfield Board of Health issued an emergency order to Verizon that documents all of this, including the corrupt guy for the industry. And they say to Verizon, please come to the table within 7 days and let's work this out. Otherwise, we're going to issue a cease and desist order. Well, they didn't come. On the 7th day, they went to the courts and put an injunction against the Board of Health because they think they can stand behind that Telecom Act of 1996 and put a cell tower wherever they want to put one. But the Board of Health had done its homework. It had spoken to the state level Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, and they believe they have determined that that Telecom Act only applies to the application process to site a cell tower. Once something comes in and becomes operational in the community, it is now the jurisdiction of the Board of Health to remediate any nuisance or health or environmental issues. So the Board of Health believes that they are in the right and that they can take action against Verizon. So they had gone and figured out that it would cost, 2 different pathways maybe to take this to court against Verizon, maybe a sum total of $80-some thousand. And when Verizon got that restraining order basically against, this Board of Health, the Board of Health turned back to their mayor and city council who had told them to go investigate this. We need this much money to take this to court and get these people back in their homes. And their mayor and their city council refused to give their own Board of Health the funding needed to bring these families home. So now there's a civil lawsuit against the town of Pittsfield, the city of Pittsfield, their mayor, and their Board of Health. The Board of Health understands that they had to be put in that lawsuit, and it's not a big deal for them because if the lawsuit wins, then the Board of Health will be able to execute their authority and take Verizon down on this. We hope. We hope to hear back on this lawsuit sometimes this spring. And if we do, and if it goes in our favor, then that will be groundbreaking. And we've heard that the industry has already set aside billions because they know it's already in their reports to their shareholders. They know this is a huge risk. Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others have long since recognized this is a world-leading risk, and they put exclusions in their policies. They don't cover for damages. That's how bad this is. So our towns don't know any of this. They get intimidated by the industry that says, we're going to sue you if you don't approve this application for a cell tower. So they roll over, rubber stamp it, and then we get into toxic situations. So these lawsuits are happening all over the world, and there's many resources you can look at. So aside from legal, the public policies. So we've had bills here in Massachusetts for a decade now, and we've worked really hard to get them out of the first committee, but we've never gotten anything enacted into law. We had the same conversation with a state rep from New Hampshire. One of his constituents got so sick in her home, she was like heading toward her deathbed. She figured out the wireless thing, got all the wireless out of her house. Her husband and kids are saying, yeah, mom's crazy, right? The kids had given her a plant that sat in her kitchen doing nothing for a year or two. And as soon as she got rid of the wireless, within 2 months, that plant shot up 15 inches. And that's what convinced Deb Hodgson's family that she wasn't crazy. She introduced me to her state rep. They drove down to my house from New Hampshire to Massachusetts. We spent the afternoon at my kitchen table and helped them connect the dots. Why does the industry for insurance walk away from this? Why does the legal fine print exist that says don't touch it? Why is the FCC ignoring the science? Why are they not looking at the non-thermal biological effects? And why does our country allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? Well, because we have the industry here. And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect of all these exposures coming from so many directions at once? And so in less than a year, we brought in the experts. In 7 months, it cleared the House committee, the Senate committee, and it went under the governor's pen into law that they had 1 year to investigate this issue, and they did. And they issued this groundbreaking report, which is arguably our country's best document on this topic today. They had highly qualified doctors, scientists, engineers, state level authorities, legislators, and of course they invited the industry to the table because they wanted to get it all out there. So that report is very powerful. And Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire has recently retired as the chair of the Department of Computer and Electrical Engineering. And he thought, of course, wireless is fine. He'd spent 30 years in his career doing this, even with medical devices. But once he started reading the peer-reviewed science, he did a complete 180. And now he is out making inroads to try and change our world to get away from wireless for primary connectivity and get to hardwired fiber optics to and through the premises. So we've been working very hard for a number of years. Additional bills have been introduced. There's 15 recommendations in that report, and they need new legislation to enact the recommendations. And every time we get in there, the industry gets in there with their deep pockets and their fear tactics, and they kill these bills. So we have now seen bills come up in other states as well, in Maine, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts. We have 6 bills. Our bill for forming a commission has advanced out of the Consumer Protection Committee. It's now with Senate Ways and Means. Most of our smart meter bill, we want an opt-out. We don't want to have a smart meter on our home because we know how sick they can make us. We want a no-fee opt-out. They should really simply hardwire the meters to the house and get rid of the radio frequency transmitters. But a no-fee opt-out is a good first step, and that one has just gotten an extension for the Joint Committee on Telecom, Utilities, and Energy to report out by April. So we've got all sorts of bills here, and you can look at those more closely. And there are bills in other states too. Tennessee just introduced 2 bills for the smart meters. Now, one of the things that the industry does when they roll into town is they tell our towns, here's some applications. You're going to get a financial kickback for letting us use the public access way to put up these cell towers and now these small cell antennas. And by the way, if anybody starts complaining about, oh, it's going to be harmful to health or whatever, those are just the NIMBYs. Those are just the not in my backyard kind of people, right? Well, that simply is not true. And they'll say, oh, nobody else cares about this issue. Well, Americans for Responsible Technology now lists more than 150 groups all across the nation that are formed, and citizens are pushing back, educating their communities, and putting restrictions in place so that you cannot just come in and put this toxic stuff right next to where we are. So lots of good examples on cell towers here, just in our own state of Massachusetts, you can look around at. And then at the town level, the city of Boston has filed with the FCC that says, hey, we believe the public and the science. You guys need to be doing your job. Boston also banded together with mayors from towns all across the country to sue the FCC. They didn't win that case, but it does show that there's solidarity and we can all band together and work on this. Burlington appointed a committee in their town with members of all the boards across the town, from health to zoning and planning and their select board and everybody in between. They came up with a small cell policy, and on the night that they ratified that, the Verizon attorney was there, and they had 7 small cell applications in with Burlington. And what Burlington did is they hired an attorney who specializes in telecom law, and they said, if you get approval for these antennas, one, you need to make sure it's compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't just stick one of these poles on the sidewalk where a wheelchair couldn't get by. It's got to be aesthetically pleasing. It can't be this big, ugly thing. And then what they did is they said, you can't just drop and run. Put this equipment in and we never see you again. If we give you approval for this application, you are now required to come back every single year and recertify that that equipment is still in line with the current law. And we as a town, we don't have that expertise on staff. So you, Verizon, and any other vendor will have to pay us a fee every year for every small cell to come in and recertify through an independent engineer that everything is still up to speed. Well, the Verizon attorney said, well, we don't actually want to set precedent for that because, mind you, they want to put millions of these in, and that would significantly cut into their bottom line. So they withdrew their small cell antenna applications. And Burlington also has in their zoning code preferential areas where cell towers can go. Put them in the industrial parks and then put them in the business areas. And the last thing on the list is residential. We do not want cell towers or small cells in our neighborhoods. So that became part of an example. There's a template that our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have come up with. And after we taught some other towns in Massachusetts what Burlington did, other towns started adopting and even improving on what Burlington did. So if your town is not looking at this, it's up to you as the citizen to get folks around you educated in your community, and then as a group, go start talking to your towns and educating them. And that's why we do these free public education webinars every month. So there's always a quick, credible place to come learn and bring your community with you. So lots of good inroads happening, lots of educational opportunities. In Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured out what 5G was. She went to her local board. One of them was a doctor. It made sense to him, and they put a moratorium on 5G, and they have re-upped that moratorium now twice. Stamford, Connecticut brought in a panel of experts, of doctors and scientists, and they just recently said to the governor, no, thank you. We don't want that plan that you and the industry cobbled together to start putting 5G small cells at the curb outside of our residential homes. No, thank you. Hawaii County had a moratorium or a resolution on this. So this is happening all over the world. We just don't hear about it because they own mainstream media. So lots of good examples to empower our legislators and our local municipalities. A couple of quick words on schools. So a group of doctors banded together in Louisiana. They got a unanimous bill passed that says, hey, they have pushed this wireless technology and all this screen time into our schools, and cardiologists are saying it's not safe. Ophthalmologists are saying this is not safe. lifestyle doctors for obesity and exercise are saying this is not safe and healthy for our children. So Louisiana passed a unanimous law that I think it's their Department of Health and their technology department have to come together and start rolling out best practices for digital devices to get the balance back, to get children active again. They need touch, they need movement, they need meaningful connection with trusted adults and their peers, and they need to be out in nature. That's what properly develops a child, not staying in the shallows of a screen. So lots of great news. The Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, parts of France, England, they are taking tech out of the classrooms, except for where it's needed medically or in a digital media lab where you just go in to learn the technology skills. New York Times did a series of articles about Silicon Valley execs are sending their kids to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless, no technology, because they know that's not how you develop a proper child, to the point where they're having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. So our friends at Grassroots Environmental Education, they have the project Americans for Responsible Technology, and they also launched this Tech Safe Schools national program. You can reach out to them. They will send packets of information to your schools to help you start the conversation on the risks from a legal perspective, a health perspective, and most importantly, how to fix this in our schools, how to remediate. So the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already developed K through 12 curriculum. Dr. Alexia McKnight, who's the radiologist who got so sick from the smart meter, she brought me in to do a professional development day at her kids' schools on Health and Wellness Day. And we did 4 sessions that day. It was great. So there's a video of our presentation. We can be brought in to help. We have our little course. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust have a ton of fact sheets and postcards and flyers and all sorts of great things. Maryland, their public health agency is the first to recommend hiring people to get in there and hardwire our schools. And then the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools does green school certifications. And with great thanks to Dr. Tony Stein, she helped them to come up with this low EMF best practices to address the dirty electricity as well as the radio frequency radiation. So other countries were already way ahead of this. When the pandemic hit, they taught their families how to study more safely at home. They didn't just let them go home and fry on these devices. So lots of great resources. The first medical school textbook for the healthcare practitioners has now come out. So that is now able to be used in medical school training and Physicians for Safe Technology with Dr. Cindy Russell. They have excellent resources, so it's a safe, credible place to send your own healthcare teams to start researching this. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we now have the EMF Medical Conference. And then, you know, there's resources for everybody. When we did that Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference, Frank Clegg is the retired president of Microsoft Canada. As an output of that conference, there was a call for papers. And so Mr. Clegg and other scientists and doctors and others came up with this paper of what really makes a smart and healthy building. So how to remediate, all sorts of resources for solutions for engineering and beyond. And then for you and I, a lot of people are do-it-yourselfers. A lot of people are terrified at the thought of playing with wires. So there are professionals to just put Ethernet ports back in your walls. All you need to do is bring in your local electrician. There is an entire profession, highly qualified, credentialed group of professionals called building biologists who are certified through the Building Biology Institute and other organizations. They can come in and do all the indoor assessments for air quality on mold and VOCs and formaldehyde. They can test your water. And there are those who have become certified consultants in electromagnetic radiation specialty. So you can hire somebody to come in. You can sit down with your loved ones and watch this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. It's available now through most of our library streaming services, or you can purchase it online and download it for just a few dollars. Bert Wolf on PBS does travel shows. He's done 2 episodes, half-hour episodes on this. And here's a toolkit out at Americans for Responsible Technology to give you what you need to start this conversation with your friends, your neighbors, and your town. And we have to remember that our kids are big fans of monkey see, monkey do. If they see you on your devices all the time, that gives them permission to follow suit. So we need to model good behavior. This 50 ways to take a break reminds us of all the cool things that we used to do, get out and do creative art projects, create music, go out into nature, go check in on your neighbors, go outside and play games, go take a nap in a hammock somewhere. But we shouldn't spend our lives in front of screens. So there's also another entire body of science on earthing or grounding. We talked about the earth gives us these healthy electromagnetic fields, and we need to be connected to that. That's what helps to regulate our body. Dr. Laura Conover wrote this great book that tells us through all 4 seasons, because here in the Northeast, we can't be walking around barefoot half the year, but how can we ground naturally? And she's got great suggestions in there. Okay, so at the municipal level, and for all of us really, the goal should be to get to as low as reasonably achievable. That's the ALARA principle that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already uses for ionizing radiation, like the sun or X-rays or gamma rays or all of that good stuff. We would never leave ourselves exposed for 24 hours a day. So we need to do the same thing for our non-ionizing, non-thermal, low-level, man-made radio frequency radiation. So spend as little time as we can in the exposures. The second principle with the ALARA is create as much distance from a radiating device as you can. And the third is if you can't get away from it, you better shield yourself. And that's where hiring a professional comes in handy. So when our towns begin to investigate, we have great resources for municipal leaders, but it's critically important to differentiate the public's priorities from what the industry's been selling us. So this free resource online is called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, and it talks our towns through why wireless infrastructure is a raw deal on a dozen different levels. And then we always need to measure not against what the FCC says, because they were never biologically safety tested, but what the scientific body of literature tells us. And that's where somebody like Safe Living Technologies that makes some of these meters, they can tell you what those numbers should be. So next steps, we cannot kid ourselves. There is no safe level of man-made radiation. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who used to run, she's now retired, the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. Although there are still some good people at the federal level, she really believes it's got to push up from the local and the state level before there's enough pressure to make the federal do their job. So let's keep educating. We will be doing these education sessions twice a month for the foreseeable future. Our videos are posted online. And then I can be brought in, others can be brought in to do training webinars or information sessions with your towns. And here's a couple of examples of ones we've done. But please, let's get this conversation going with our schools, but don't just go straight to your schools. Use those resources, watch Generation Zapped, learn and teach everybody around you first. Once you have a group of people, you can't be swept under the rug. One voice is easily swept under the rug. And then start where you are. What do you do for a living? How can we engage the people in your world through your professional organizations? They're always looking for public speakers for their conferences. That's my happy place, is educating people. So let's use the resources that we have. Our town should be encouraged to form committees, offer no-fee opt-outs on these silly smart meters, and then start migrating toward hardwired technology with no radio frequency in our public spaces and in our homes. And most of our town attorneys are wonderful, but they are no match for the wireless industry, and very few are experts in telecom law. So as Burlington, Massachusetts did, they should hire a consultant to come in and help them get it right and build really strong zoning bylaws. And we have all sorts of resources. Somebody like Andrew Campanelli can come in and revamp your zoning code according to your state rules and the federal rules for about $8,500, which is not a huge amount for a town to do this to prevent the sickness that's going to happen otherwise. So for today, here's our little chart on how you can take control, hardwire, turn off the antennas, and measure. So start noticing what's radiating around you and be gentle. Start with baby steps. Maybe tonight you'll create a sleep sanctuary and shut everything off. Your clock still works on your cell phone. Your alarm still works when it's fully in airplane mode. If you have an iPhone, if you go into airplane mode, you also need to look at the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi setting. If it says not connected, that's not good enough. It means it's still going, here I am, here I am. It's pulsing that radiation. It's just not connecting to anything yet. Just go in there and turn it off and turn the Bluetooth off. Make sure they're both off. And then you can still use it. You don't want to charge anything near where you sleep because that creates dirty electricity that can interfere with your biology too. And then make your way toward Ethernet cables and adapters and just make it a habit. Keep everything in airplane mode. Turn off every antenna you're not using and only turn on the one antenna that you need for the shortest amount of time. And here's some of those wonderful resources from the Environmental Health Trust, all these great checklists and flyers and everything that you could use to start getting word out in your community. So thank you so much for your attention for nearly 2 hours here. Here's how you can get in touch with us. Dr. Ott has this Pennsylvanians for Safe Technology website. You can also email her directly at this Gmail address. And here's the interview that she and I did together. You can also reach me through Massachusetts for Safe Technology or shoot me an email at this address. So we'll stop sharing now. And if Dr. DeSanto Ott is still with us, I will ask her if there's anything happening in the chat that we might want to address. So you can go ahead and unmute, Donna.
Thank you. There was someone who was asking about legal assistance for Massachusetts.
Legal assistance in
Yes. I'm
Massachusetts.
gonna have to put these glasses on so I can see.
Yeah, there are a few attorneys. There's a gentleman named Paul Revere Jr., I think, who's down at the Cape. There is Donna Brewer, who is the attorney that Burlington brought in, who came up with that strategy for making the industry come back in and recertify. So Paul Revere down at Cape Cod, Donna Brewer, and I'm trying to think. There have been a few others that have helped other towns. So if you want to reach out to me, shoot me an email and I'll see if I can connect you. Let me know what area you're looking at, whether it's your zoning code or it's smart meters or something else, and we might be able to fine tune that a little bit more. Okay. Anything else in the chat?
There was, oh, here we go. Where can I find the posting for churches?
Posting for churches. Can you unmute yourself and give us a little more information on that?
That was from Nanette.
Oh, yeah.
Church.
Hi, it's me. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay, good, thanks. I'm sorry, I typed that really fast, but Cece, I remember in an email you sent that you said that there were some bills that you had in the legislature house that had some sort of reference to churches and cell phone towers. And I was looking on your site. I didn't see them. I was curious to read those.
That wasn't actually a bill, but there was some legal activity going on down at Cape Cod in Centerville, where the industry came in and put 9 big macro antennas in the church steeple right in a dense populated neighborhood.
Oh.
So their town has been working on that. If that's an issue that you're up against, if you email me, I can put you in touch with Centerville Concerned Citizens. And it was the attorney Paul Revere that was working with them there, but the town didn't do what he recommended. So when the judge looked at the record, the town hadn't put the right stuff in it. And the judge can only do what's in the record. So
Oh.
lessons learned, but we can connect you with those folks if you'd like.
No, it wasn't. I'm not interested in anything
Okay.
out of the Cape. I thought that there was some sort of bigger statewide effort, and I was curious on how you were approaching that. That's all.
No, it would be, our closest thing in Massachusetts is the bill that we've got. It's Senate Resolve 155 with Senator Julian Sear. It's been voted out favorably by the Joint Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure. And that would form a commission to investigate the whole issue.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You know, you're a
Um,
really good speaker, Cece. I just want to let you know that you're a very
oh.
good presenter.
Well, we try not to scare anybody. Trust me, there's a little lady tucked inside here that's jumping up and down going, we're frying our frickin' kids and pollinators. But I can't let her lead the discussion because then everyone marks the exits and I would be their out to not have to listen to this conversation. So it's been a number of years to learn how to speak calmly about this issue.